Welcome to Assembly Calendar. I'm Mike Friesen. With us for our program today, Assemblyman Mike Norris. Mike Norris represents the 144th Assembly District in New York State. That's an Assembly District that includes the counties of Niagara, Orleans, and Erie. We want to thank you folks across Western New York for joining us. Mike Norris, always a pleasure to see you.
It's great to see you too, Mike. Thank you for having me today.
It's still maintaining that busy routine here in Albany, right? This has been a legislative session like none other in recent memory. You hit the ground running in January, and it's been bam, 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 one thing after another, and now we're into budget negotiations already here in Albany.
Yeah, the proposed budget is $175 billion of your tax dollars, and we're going through the process currently. The governor has already put out the proposed budget. There were 30-day amendments. Now we went back to the legislature. This week we'll probably be voting on the one House budget bills, which would be the Assembly version and the priorities out of the majority in the Assembly, and then the Senate will have their version from the majority with their priorities. And then there'll be budget conference committees, and hopefully, because I'm a big proponent of making sure we have an on-time budget by April 1st in the city of New York.
Sounds easy.
It sounds very easy, but there are as you know, very complicated issues that are facing these negotiations. Revenues are down in the city of New York, and there's a reason for that. And the governor will say people are leaving New York because of the weather. Well, it's not because of the weather. We've certainly gotten through some of these storms this year. It's because of high property taxes and, quite frankly, the lack of good paying jobs. I'm a very strong voice against the massive spending that's occurring here in New York State. When you take the budgets of Texas and Florida combined, it equals New York's budget. They have just as many problems as we do. Now, in terms of making sure that we look at certain portions of the budget, 40% is in human services, Medicaid services. That's an area that our conference believes strongly that we can have some reductions in, some consolidation, even within the transportation systems of getting Medicaid patients around. We have a proposal that would reduce the burden on state taxpayers by $6 billion. These are the areas that we have to do a very diligent job to ensure that we are reducing spending in the state of New York.
The Medicaid thing, let me hold you up there
Sure.
for a second, because when you look at, I love pie charts. One, because I like pie, but but they're also something I can understand. And when you've got the entire budget in a circle and you divvy it up into the issue areas that the spending goes to, Medicaid is usually one of the biggest portions of that state budget pie. So if you can back off, what'd you say, $6 billion?
$6 billion
in savings and budget? I mean, that's significant. That's real money, $6 billion.
That's real money, and even looking at things going forward in terms of Medicaid, listen, I believe that if someone loses their job, we should be there as a society to help them through the transition period. But the cycle of dependency of being on social services for decade after decade has got to stop. And I also am very proud to say I support a bill that will require drug testing for Medicaid and social service recipients. I think that's only common sense. If you're receiving dollars from the city of New York, that you should be drug tested if you're receiving those types of funds. So even in the long-term plan, we are trying to come up with real solutions to reduce spending in a common sense way in the city of New York.
You take out what the governor's been saying about why people have been leaving New York State, and those numbers are real. There's a lot of people that have left New York in the last 10 years. And the thing about the weather being bad, the weather hasn't really changed too much in New York State from year to year. It stays pretty consistent, but the one thing that has changed, as you noted, is the tax rate. The tax rate keeps going up and up and up. And anybody that has stuck around in New York State knows that to be true. Our taxes haven't been going down.
No, they haven't been going down. They only go up. We were talking briefly about Assemblyman Dave Seaman, who served from 1995 to 2002. I worked for him, and you remember Assemblyman Seaman.
I sure do.
When he came into office, the budget was around $55 billion. So just in about 20 years, we've gone up to $175 billion. Simple math there, we've tripled the budget.
Yeah.
So we have to really hone in here in the city of New York, reduce our spending, reduce the tax burden. We've lost 1 million people in New York since 2010, and it's because of the high spending and because of the high taxes. A point on that, you know, the tax cap is 2% throughout the municipalities. I believe strongly that we need to have a 2% permanent tax cap. That's something that the governor and I do agree on, because we need to make sure that we do our job to keep the taxes as low as possible. Now, when I have discussions with local municipalities, with local educators, there might be some reasons for exemptions to that 2% tax cap. Capital projects, for a perfect example, maybe security within schools. Those are reasonable exemptions to the tax cap that need to be explored, and I would be in favor of those. But overall, we know the tax burden is very high on the people on New Yorkers, and the 2% permanent tax cap will go a long way to keeping our property taxes down.
One of the things that you see here on any given week at the state capitol are groups that come to Albany who want their voice, their message to be heard. And the groups range from small groups to big groups. There are all kinds of lobbyists. Some of them wear very expensive suits, and others wear their uniforms or their work clothes that they work in. One of the groups that was here in big numbers this past week were the local highway superintendents. They seem to say New York State is spending an awful lot of money. Spending's going up each year. You talked about how big the budget's getting. Taxes is going up to support that spending. But they say local roads in the state, bridges, things like culverts that might not be real sexy when you're trying to get votes and be a member of the state legislature. These things are important and not getting funded the way they think they ought to be.
Yeah, I was so pleased that our local highway superintendents from all three counties, Erie, Niagara, and Orleans, were here. Now, they're your elected officials at the local level, right on the ground, and they came up en masse, and there was over 500 or so here at the state capitol lobbying to make sure that when it comes down to priorities within a $175 billion budget, infrastructure remains at the very top of the list. I'm very supportive of that. They have what we call the CHIPS program, and that's funds from the city of New York that goes back to local municipalities to assist with our roads, our bridges, and our culverts. And it has been flat really for over the last decade. There's been no increase in that. But as you know, we've had a pretty harsh winter back in Western New York. The potholes are starting to come. They need to be filled for the safety and security of children going to school, people going to work, people getting around. So I'm optimistic as a member of the Transportation Assembly Committee that we will be able to make sure that we restore our CHIPS funding after the governor made some proposed cuts, as well as explore winter recovery additional dollars. Last year, there was $65 million throughout the city of New York for cases where they needed additional assistance because of the harsh winter we had. We're fighting very hard to get that restored in this year's budget as well. When it comes down to the budget, it comes down to priorities. It's just like in your households. Where do you spend the money? Where do you not spend the money? I'm a strong advocate that we need to put our dollars into infrastructure, into our roads and our bridges. These are economic reasons, because when large corporations, small corporations look to come to Western New York and in New York State, they want to make sure there's a sound transportation infrastructure in place to transport their goods, to transport their employees from their house to work. So this is the very basics of our government, and I'm a big, strong advocate to ensure that our infrastructure is sound and in place.
People just have to look when you're out driving around on the roads. You know that it's not just other cars that are on those roads with you, but all those big trucks, those 18-wheelers are hauling goods. Look how much retail now is done on the roads. Is Amazon sending you folks some packages? There's got to be somebody getting those packages to your house. I mean, those are the facts of life these days.
Yeah, and it's very basic to me. You know, the government, we can go back 200 years. They made sure we had a strong military, and we began making sure our infrastructure is in place. We built the railroad system. We built the Erie Canal. We built roads over time. This is the basics of government, and I think my constituents, when I'm at the volunteer fire companies over this past couple weekends at their installation dinners, which I want to shout out to all of our volunteer fire service within New York State, they save over $3 billion of taxpayers' dollars. They're there for us night and day. I want to thank them for their service. I've been very glad to be at many of their installation dinners. Speaking with our highway superintendents, you know, being at the Clarence Chamber of Commerce Awards dinner, people were saying to me, Mike, you know, we need to make sure we have sound infrastructure. We need to have good roads. It's the basics of our economy, of our government. And I think the taxpayers agree with me on this point, that we need to have our fair share. We need to make a strong investment into our roads and bridges, and that's something I'm going to continue to fight hard for the people of Western New York.
You mentioned at the top of the show, the governor put forth his budget proposal to the legislature early on in the year. This week, as we tape this program in Albany, the Senate is going to pass its idea of what a budget should look like. The Assembly is going to do the same thing. So everybody now will be on record. The governor, the Assembly, and the Senate, and the serious talks all begin. And those budget differences hopefully get ironed out in something that's been going on for a while now here at the state capitol, joint budget conference committees, where members of the Assembly and the Senate, Democrats and Republicans, gather together at these forums and try to iron out and figure out where the spending differences could begin. You've been appointed now to serve on the Transportation Committee, pertinent with the discussion you and I are having here right now about the roads and the bridges and the importance of infrastructure for the future of economic development in the state of New York.
Yeah, I was very pleased that Leader Brian Cobb, our Republican leader of the Assembly, did appoint me onto that joint budget committee for transportation. I'm very proud to serve also on the Assembly Transportation Committee, receiving that appointment, because it is very, very important to our economy. It's important to our future, for job growth and economic development, and just for our overall public safety. When we did the infrastructure task force earlier last year, it was in the fall, we had our local sheriffs come. We had the local public safety officers come, and they were very clear that this, you know, our accidents are caused because of poor roads, because of poor bridges, and this is something that we have to make sure that we pay attention to, and we make sure the dollars are. When you talk about these budget committees now, you know, there's been a change since last year. Before, the Senate Republicans were in the majority, the Assembly Democrats were in the majority. This year, the Democrats are in charge of both houses. Many of them are from downstate New York City and Long Island. And it's going to be very interesting to see whether or not they pay attention to the people of Western New York. I mean, we live here, we pay taxes here, we spend our dollars here, and we need to make sure when it comes to our roads, into our library, and to our education system, that we're getting our fair share for the people of Western New York. I'm going to be a strong advocate on that transportation task force and continue fighting for the people of Western New York in these budget negotiations.
That's why it's important to have somebody like a Mike Norris sitting there at the table when these issues come up for discussion and we get close to having budget deals finalized. We'll be watching.
I'm looking forward to it.
See how things go. In the meantime, you folks want to know how to reach out to your representative. Easy thing for you to do. You can contact Mike Norris at his office, which is in Williamsville, 8180 Main Street. You can call that office, 716-839-4690. Easiest way to do it, you see it right there on the bottom of the screen. Take out your phone, send them an email, norrism@nyassembly.gov. norrism@nyassembly.gov. You do a lot of business, I'm going to guess, by email nowadays.
We do. I love receiving the emails, whether it be on an issue or a local matter. Please reach out to me. I do. Every morning, grab my cup of coffee to review my emails.
Mike Norris, thanks for joining us today.
You.
Thank you, folks, for spending your time. We'll hope to see you soon for our next edition of Assembly Calendar.